Liberty Celtics in Pittsburgh.
As far as I know, I was looking at all this stuff.
Okay.
I don't know when I'll be done with that.
The story is Bush Heartbeat. It's sound on tape.
Put a wireless on there just so we can hear her.
Curiosity is the most basic and I think important thing that you have to bring to this job. You want to know what's going on out there. And if it means you're nosy, fine.
We ruined this Saturday night when we came out and
Every story, no matter how similar it is to the one before, has something that makes it different. And you have to identify what it is. What is it in an individual story? What is that element that is going to make that story mean something to someone?
This television newsroom is in Boston, Massachusetts. The decisions made here every day affect what hundreds of thousands of people see on the news each night. We'll look at how those decisions are made, about what stories to cover, how to cover them, and how to best tell those stories to viewers. The assignment desk is where decision-making starts early in the morning.
The assignment editor really is the first person to get a story going.
The assignment editor comes up with the initial list of stories for possible coverage each day, and he gets his story ideas from a variety of sources. There's a daily folder filled with press releases and information about scheduled events. Reporters and photographers call in with ideas. His assistant gets calls from local officials and viewers about events happening that day.
Up towards House Neck. Up towards House Neck.
C Street toward the House Neck area.
The assignment editor monitors the police radios for crime and accident reports.
One under arrest at that scene.
He also checks the newswire reports and reads the newspapers. Today, President Bush's heart condition is the major headline. That story dominates the discussion at the morning editorial meeting.
Okay, President Bush, let me tell you the status of things that I know on Bush. I have a
The executive producer, 5 and 6 o'clock producers, the managing editor, assignment editor, assistant news director, and news director go over the news of the day each morning. The executive producer has an idea for the medical reporter, Lester.
You got to find people who have the same condition who go about their life. And
We're on the same medication.
The lawyer
There are side effects to the medication.
The question is whether we want to do a live doctor at 5, and I don't know if we do, if we're going to have Lester's piece, because we may have...
If we do Lester's piece at 5:30, it would
Right.
be nice to have a doctor in the A section.
The assignment editor's story rundown provides the framework for the rest of the meeting. There's the sentencing of Pam Smart, convicted of conspiring to kill her husband. The investigative reporter has the first part of a series on minority loan scams. By the end of the morning meeting, decisions are made on story coverage, story angle, and reporter assignments. The assignment editor puts the stories on the newsroom board so all can see what's being covered. He also has the photographers get their camera gear ready to go out with reporters on stories.
I like to think of my job in ultimate terms as a photojournalist, going out and getting pictures that, put the story together.
The executive producer meets with each reporter to go over the story assignment, and on the major story of the day enlists the help of a producer.
What we're ideally seeing is that Lester does like a 5:30 sidebar piece. We ideally find a patient or two. You do your localized patient-doctor sidebar piece for 5:30, but for 6 you would do the Bush story, which would encompass the president today, the president's doctors who had their thing, whatever, if there's any other White House material, and then would come back to a little bit of a local thing.
A writer is assigned to the Bush story for the day. Her first assignment, the new news.
We're starting with a cold open, which means that the first thing you're going to see in the show is instead of seeing the anchors first, you're going to see video. What I'm doing here is I'm going through my wire to get the latest information. And I'm going to go through my national wire, and I see a story on the AP that says Bush, so I'm going to get into that story and print it out so I can use the wire to write the story. and my wire tells me that he's starting a normal day back at work, and so here I write the story, and I have Edie starts the show saying, "Back to work and feeling all right." Those words from President Bush after spending the weekend in the hospital.
The tape is coming on the 11 a.m. feed. It's one of the many daily feeds of international and national stories that each network sends to its affiliated stations by satellite. The feeds are taped and organized by the video coordinator.
All tape eventually at some point comes here. And my job is to sort of try to keep track of all the tape, keep track of all the feeds that are incoming from the network and from bureaus and from various different sources, so that all the writers and reporters know where to find things.
The tape editor, with instructions from the writer, edits the tape.
To do the president walking out of his car and greeting his dog for 20 seconds, say. The audio comes off of channel 1, set the meter, find the in point, and then hit auto edit.
The editor times the tape and marks on a cut sheet how many seconds of voiceover and sound are on the tape and when the tape ends. The tape is labeled and given to the video coordinator, who keeps it until it's played in a news program. The producers, meanwhile, are figuring out how those programs will look. At 5 p.m.,
you got a 1-hour show, but in terms of how much time do you have to fill, it can range from 25 minutes of news to, I've seen as much as 31 minutes of news. But that's discounting stuff. When the other thing you have to do is take out everything you have in your show besides news. That includes your weather, your sports. When you come to it, before you go to a break, you got to write a tease. You have to subtract everything and come up with a figure for exactly how much news you can fit in. And today's figure's about 25 minutes, but when you have a story like President Bush, you can't say, okay, we'll give the Bush story 2 minutes and then we'll get out of it. We're figuring sidebars. So I'm figuring my first section, which is going to be about 10, 11 minutes long. Right now it's looking like 4.5 to 5 minutes are going to be spent on President Bush.
The president isn't making the only news. Other stories have to be included, and the writers and reporters working on those stories want time to tell them well.
A cold-blooded murderer, a non-caring, non-loving. Well, I'm very sorry for you.
Pam Smart is being sentenced. A microwave truck sends an electronic TV signal back from the courtroom so a writer can watch live as the victim's father testifies. The writer says it's emotional and needs 2.5 minutes.
It's about time that we stopped listening and kowtowing to the special interest on Beacon Hill and started...
The investigative reporter has reaction to her piece from local officials. It's an exclusive story generating outrage. She wants 8 minutes. At the State House on Beacon Hill, the political reporter is talking to legislators about the new budget. He calls the executive producer with his assessment of the story.
It appears not to be any big deal.
But the executive producer and reporter decide it's still worth including in one newscast.
A news exists in its own internal environment. There happens to be a lot of news today elsewhere, not on Beacon Hill. So Beacon Hill's not going to get a lot of time. On an equal day with very much less news, this could end up taking 2 minutes. Not because it's any more substantial, but because the rest of the news environment isn't.
So with all these stories, the 5 and 6 p.m. producers struggle to fit all the information into their programs.
So you basically have the lead section of the show only doing 3 stories, which are the president's health, a live interview with a doctor, the Smart sentencing, and this mortgage discrimination story with the investigative unit. From a production standpoint, it's kind of a blocky show where you're doing, a story in a big chunk, another story in a big chunk, and a third story in a big chunk. And the way we've gotten around that is by bringing in a reporter on the Smart trial in live. We have the reporter in Washington live, and we have a doctor in the newsroom, and we have the investigative reporter on the set. So even though you've only got 4 stories there, things will be bouncing around. There'll be a lot of interaction, and it should be good.
And at 6 o'clock,
It's really tight. It's very tight on time. There's not a lot of breathing room.
The sports producer is also pushing for time to do the best sportscast.
Regardless of the fact that it's sports, it's still news. It's something new. It's something that they don't know, and we really feel strongly that that's the kind of stuff that we try to get across to them first.
The referee in all this is usually the executive producer, who makes a judgment on what stories are included.
Sometimes judgment is a matter of being able to categorize all the things that are going on and translate that into a newscast. And sometimes that is being able to see through other things and saying, this really is meaningless, but this is something that is important for people to know.
On a day like today, I'm not going to give weather quite as much, so I'll probably give weather 2.5 minutes, 2.5 to 2:45 the first half hour, and maybe as little as just a 1-minute quick update the second time around.
But the meteorologist has a wealth of information to get across.
We get about 100 weather maps a day in from the National Meteorological Center in Washington. All sorts of stuff showing us what's going on down on the ground where we live, thousands of feet up. Some are computer prognostic charts, others are observations of current conditions. And we try to post them all, keep careful track of them, keep reviewing all the new stuff that's coming in, and it's all part of the mix.
Add to that mix hourly reports from the National Weather Service.
Manchester, New Hampshire's raining, Portsmouth, Nashua. There's a large area of rain across the area. And after I finish this, I'll go over to the radar and it'll all support what's happening here. The radar beam is sending out energy, intercepted by the raindrops, comes back. As a return, it's colorized to show light rain, moderate rain, heavy rain.
The meteorologist has to make his forecast and convey that information in just a couple of minutes, plus add some personality to the show.
Usually when I put the 6 o'clock show together, I like to leave a fair amount of breathing room for the anchors so that they can talk and get their personalities out over the air.
But today there's no time for that. The format of the newscast is complete. The format shows the order of the stories, how long they will run, whether a reporter or an anchor will tell a story. But much still needs to be done. The format on the computer has to be translated into words and pictures. We'll look at the production of the news programs in part 2 of this series.